It didn't begin with a crime scene. No flashing lights. No police tape. No frantic 911 call echoing through the night. It began with something far quieter. A girl who simply didn't come home. 17-year-old Victoria Marquina was not the kind of person people expected to disappear. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't known for running away. She didn't live a life filled with chaos or unpredictability. If anything, her life followed a pattern. School, home, friends, routine. The kind of routine that makes people feel safe. The kind of routine that makes disappearance feel impossible. To her family, Victoria was dependable. The type of girl who checked in. The type who didn't stay out without saying something. The type who understood boundaries. So when hours passed without a word, it didn't feel like independence. It felt wrong. At first, they told themselves the usual things. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she stayed with a friend. Maybe she just needed space. But deep down, there was a feeling no one wanted to say out loud. Because when someone like Victoria disappears without warning, it's rarely by choice. What no one realized at the time was that Victoria had been carrying something heavy. Not physically obvious to the outside world. Not something you could see at a glance. But something that had quietly been shaping her decisions, her thoughts, her future. Victoria was pregnant. It wasn't public knowledge. Not something announced. Not something openly discussed. Only a few people knew. And even among those who did, there were questions. Who was the father? How serious was the relationship? Was she safe? Was she okay? Because this wasn't just teenage news. This was complicated. And the deeper people looked, the more complicated it became. The man believed to be connected to her pregnancy wasn't just another teenager. He was older, old enough for people to start asking uncomfortable questions, old enough for the situation to shift from unexpected to concerning. Their communication had been ongoing, frequent, private, and, according to investigators, not always calm. At first glance, nothing seemed alarming. Just conversations, just messages, just two people trying to figure things out. But beneath the surface, there were signs of tension, messages that hinted at pressure, conversations that didn't feel balanced, moments where it seemed like Victoria wasn't fully in control of the situation. And then there was the pregnancy itself, a life-changing reality, one that can bring excitement or fear, depending on who you are and who you're tied to. For Victoria, those emotions seemed mixed, because while she continued her normal life on the outside, something underneath had shifted. Friends would later describe subtle changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed danger, but enough to notice. She seemed distracted sometimes, lost in thought, less present. There were moments when she appeared stressed, moments where she wasn't as talkative, moments where it felt like something was weighing on her, even if she didn't say it directly. And that's how it often happens, not with obvious warning signs, but with small changes that only make sense later. On the day Victoria disappeared, everything looked normal. There were no signs of panic, no urgent messages, no indication that she believed she was in danger. She left like she normally would, with her phone, with her routine, with the assumption that she would return. But that assumption would never come true. The timeline of that day would become one of the most important pieces of the investigation, because somewhere between her last known movements and the moment she vanished, something happened, something no one witnessed, something no camera clearly captured, something that erased her presence completely. Investigators would later focus heavily on her last known contact, because in cases like this, the last person to see you alive matters. And in Victoria's case, that person raised immediate concern. The same man connected to her pregnancy, According to early accounts, Victoria had been in contact with him that day. Communication that at first didn't seem unusual, but when placed under a microscope, started to look different because when investigators began asking questions, his answers didn't stay consistent. At first, his version of events seemed simple. He saw her, they interacted, she left. That was it. But simple stories become dangerous. When they don't hold up, timelines started to shift. Details became unclear. Small contradictions began to appear. And each inconsistency added weight, because if nothing happened, why did the story keep changing? As detectives dug deeper, they began reconstructing Victoria's final hours, step by step, message by message, movement by movement. But there was a problem. The trail went cold. No confirmed sighting after a certain point. No digital activity. No indication of where she went next. It was as if she had been cut out of the timeline completely. That kind of disappearance doesn't happen easily. Not in a connected world. Not in a time where cameras are everywhere. Not without leaving something behind. And yet, Victoria left almost nothing, which raised a terrifying possibility. What if she never left at all? What if the last place she was seen was the last place she ever existed? That question changed everything, because now, investigators weren't just looking for a missing girl. They were looking at the possibility of a crime scene, one that hadn't been discovered yet. The pressure intensified. Interviews became more focused, more direct, more aggressive, and the man at the center of it all, the one tied to her pregnancy, began to feel that pressure. People close to Victoria started speaking up, some quietly, some reluctantly. They shared conversations they had with her, things she mentioned, things she hinted at. Nothing concrete, nothing that proved a crime, but enough to build a picture. A picture of a young girl navigating something complicated, possibly overwhelming, possibly frightening. And at the center of that picture was the same person investigators were now questioning. By this point, the case had shifted. This was no longer treated as a typical missing person situation because patterns were forming. Behavior was being analyzed, and everything kept circling back to one conclusion. Something wasn't right. Then came a turning point. Investigators uncovered more inconsistencies, more gaps, more details that didn't align with the story they were being told. And at some point, the narrative broke, because when a story changes too many times, it stops being believable. It starts looking like something else, a cover. And that's when the investigation took a darker turn. Authorities began to operate under a new assumption, one that changed the entire direction of the case. They no longer believed Victoria had simply disappeared. They believed something had been done to her. But even with that belief, there was still one haunting problem. Victoria was still missing. No body, no confirmed location, no physical evidence that could tell the full story. Just silence. And in that silence, questions grew louder. What really happened that day? What went wrong? And why was the truth being hidden? As the case continued to build, investigators made a critical decision. They stopped treating the man at the center as just a witness and started seeing him for what he might be, a suspect, because at that point, everything pointed back to him. The connection, the inconsistencies, the timing, the motive, all of it. And when law enforcement finally acted, it confirmed what many had already begun to fear. This was no longer a search for a missing girl. It was the beginning of a murder investigation. But even then, the most important piece of the story was still missing: Victoria herself. By the time investigators officially shifted the case, they already knew one thing for certain. Victoria wasn't coming back on her own. There was no activity on her phone, no movement on her accounts, no trace of her anywhere. And for a 17-year-old girl in a connected world, that kind of silence doesn't happen naturally. It has to be created. Behind the scenes, detectives began tightening the timeline, not just broadly, but down to the smallest detail. Minutes, movements, messages. They went back through everything. Every call, every text, every interaction Victoria had in the days leading up to her disappearance. And one pattern became impossible to ignore. Her communication with the man connected to her pregnancy had intensified, not in a normal way, not in the way you'd expect from two people preparing for something life-changing. There was tension, pressure, a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. Some messages suggested disagreement. Others hinted at something more serious. But the most important detail wasn't just what was said. It was how things suddenly stopped. Because after a certain point, there were no more replies. And that point lined up almost perfectly with the last time she was seen. Investigators didn't believe in coincidences, so they turned their focus back to him. Harder this time. Another interview. More direct questions. Less room to maneuver. At first, he tried to stick to the same version of events. Said she left. Said everything was normal. Said he didn't know where she went. But under pressure, cracks widened, because the more specific the questions became, the harder it was to maintain a story that wasn't consistent. Timelines didn't match digital records. Statements didn't align with known movements. And certain details couldn't be explained at all. Then came a shift, not dramatic, not immediate, but noticeable, because instead of firm answers, he started becoming vague. I don't remember. I'm not sure. It happened so fast. And in investigations like this, vagueness can be just as telling as contradiction. Detectives weren't just listening to what he said. They were watching how he said it, the pauses, the hesitations, the moments where answers seemed constructed. And slowly, a picture began to form. Not a complete one, but enough to raise serious concern. Because if Victoria had left safely, there would be evidence, a sighting, a message, a signal, something. But there was nothing, which brought investigators back to the same chilling possibility. She never left, at least not alive. With that in mind, search efforts intensified. Areas connected to the suspect were examined more closely. Locations he had access to, places he had been, anywhere that might hold answers. But the search turned up nothing definitive. No confirmed remains. No clear crime scene. No physical evidence that could tell the full story. And yet, the case against him kept growing. Because sometimes, it's not one piece of evidence that proves something. It's the accumulation of everything that doesn't make sense. The inconsistencies, the timeline gaps, the behavioral shifts, all pointing in the same direction. Then came the moment that changed everything. Authorities made a decision to act. An arrest. It didn't bring Victoria back. It didn't reveal where she was. But it confirmed something critical. Investigators believed they knew who was responsible. The charge, murder, even without a body. That alone spoke volumes. Because to charge someone with murder without recovering the victim means investigators believe they have enough to prove one thing, that the victim is no longer alive, and that someone is responsible for it. In court documents, pieces of the story began to surface. Not everything, not all at once, but enough to paint a darker picture. A confrontation. That's what investigators believe happened. A moment where tension reached a breaking point, where conversation turned into conflict, and conflict turned into something irreversible. What exactly happened in that moment remains unclear. There are no cameras to show it, no witnesses to describe it, no recording of the truth, only the aftermath. And the aftermath was silence, because after that moment, Victoria disappeared. No calls, no messages, no signs of life. Just a sudden, complete absence. And according to investigators, that absence wasn't accidental. It was intentional. A decision made in panic, or anger, or fear. Maybe all three. But even with an arrest, the most important question remained unanswered. Where is Victoria? Because without that answer, there is no closure for her family, for her friends, for anyone who has followed the case. A body doesn't just provide evidence. It provides truth. It tells a story that words can't fully explain. It confirms what happened. It ends uncertainty. But in this case, that truth is still missing. And that's what makes it so haunting. Because while investigators may believe they know how it ended, they can't prove every detail. They can't show exactly what happened in those final moments. And they can't bring her home. For her family, that's the hardest part. Not knowing where she is, not knowing what she went through, not knowing if she suffered. Just questions. Endless, painful questions. As the case moves forward through the legal system, more details may emerge. More pieces of the story may be revealed. But even then, there's no guarantee the full truth will ever be known, because some answers are buried deeper than evidence can reach. And sometimes, the only person who truly knows what happened is the one who refuses to say. A 17-year-old girl, a hidden pregnancy, a relationship filled with tension, and a disappearance that turned into something far darker. Victoria Marquina didn't just vanish. She was taken out of the world in a way that left almost nothing behind. No final message, no goodbye, no trace, just a story that ends without an ending. And somewhere out there, the truth still exists, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be found. But until that happens, Victoria remains missing, and her story remains unfinished. And somewhere out there, the truth still exists, hidden, buried, waiting, because cases like this don't just disappear. They linger in unanswered questions, in silent places, in the people still searching for closure. Victoria Marquina is still missing, and until she's found, this story isn't over. If you want more cases like this, the ones that don't make headlines along, the ones that leave more questions than answers, make sure you subscribe to Dark Truth, Unsolved Cases, because some stories fade away. But here, we don't let them. Thumbs up like the video. Push bin share it so more people see her story. Bell and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the next case might be even darker,